Well, good morning, everybody. The first thing I'd like to do, and I know Art Rooney acknowledged Bill Nunn's acceptance, well, not quite acceptance into the Hall of Fame, but the nomination for as a finalist as a contributor. And Coach Tomlin also mentioned it yesterday. But on behalf of the personnel department, we just really want to express our sincere congratulations to the family for this awesome recognition of not only a great personnel guy, but a better person and a great mentor for all of us in our careers. Every person that Bill Nunn touched was a better person for that contact. And again, we're extremely grateful, and we again want to congratulate the family. Other than that, I'm very open to any questions we have about what's going on with the Steelers in 2020.
Okay, first question is Mike Pursuta. Mike, go ahead.
Kevin, let's stay on the Bill Nunn subject. You got to have a great story about his scouting, the way he used to pull fast ones and get around guys. Give me your best one, preferably one that hasn't been beaten to death.
Well, you know, the John Stallworth story is one for the ages, and it's true. You know, we have John Stallworth as part of our ownership group, and we can talk to John about how that occurred. And when he was part of putting the best draft class in NFL history together, obviously where the fact that they got John Stallworth in the fourth round and still had the other four Hall of Famers come together with that group, it was an amazing piece of work. And, again, long story short, John Stallworth works out because we don't have pro days. John didn't run great. He didn't run great. Bill decides to stay for an extra day, talks John into rerunning. He does. And really, he told John he ran a better time. And, whether John did or not, I don't know. I do know this, that Bill Nunn loved John as a player, and then he was going to make the best opportunity for John to become a Pittsburgh Steeler. Which he did. Part of that legend also is that, back in that day, there was only one copy of the film, the team's game film, and he convinced the Alabama A&M coach that it might be best if he just takes that film back to Pittsburgh to show to Coach Noel and Art Rooney Jr., et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, he's keeping it out of the hands of other participants or other possible destinations for John. So great story. There's just so many. And Mike, you knew Bill. You met with Bill. He was just that guy, and he could tell stories outside of football. I mean, his telling the story of taking Roberto Clemente to the airport right after the 1960 World Series is just one of many interactions. He could drop Jackie Robinson's name, and, he didn't say Jackie Robinson. He said, well, when I dealt with Jackie back in the day, or an entertainer, or Joe Louis. I mean, it was just never ending. We always wanted him to write a book, but he just always felt like, we'll just we'll leave everything to his knowledge at that point.
Next up, Dale Lawley. Dale, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin. Because of the pandemic, do you foresee the team kind of pushing aside the rule that you don't negotiate contracts after the season starts? And if not, where are you guys at in some of the situations with pending free agents at the end of the season?
Yeah, we haven't talked about amending our policy. And again, that's an organizational policy that's been in place for a lot of years. So I don't anticipate that changing. We'll continue to look at situations, and if one makes sense, we'll do it. As you guys know, we never talk about individual negotiations, and we have to leave it at that. But I don't anticipate us changing that under the current conditions.
Next up, Missy Matthews from Steelers Media Productions. Missy, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin, good morning. Just curious, with so little college football seems like that will be played this fall, what is your plan with the scouting department in terms of getting ready and scouting in next year in terms of the draft?
Obviously, with some conferences deciding not to play, that's an issue. At this point, NFL personnel is still prohibited from visiting a college campus. That was something that was handed down to us from the commissioner back in March during the pro day season. It's continued to be in effect, and we respect that and understand it. And we have to try to work around it all within the legalities. So the different the schools that are playing, we won't be able to visit, but as of right now, we can go to a game and we can attend a game either via a credential or via a ticket. We try to minimize the air travel, and we have pretty good coverage with most of the guys doing some driving. We have to do some air travel, but we'll try to minimize it. So it's different, but it's the same for everybody, in our league. So we just try to make the best of it.
Next up, Jerry Dulac. Jerry, go ahead.
Kev, good morning. I'm curious, is it your intention, the team's intention, to still try to sign Cam before the season starts? And where does that stand?
Again, we never have or never will talk about an individual negotiation. As I said earlier, we're always looking at where we are, where we want to be, and not only in 2020, but we also have to keep in mind what the future holds for us in 2021 and beyond. And quite honestly, that's a big unknown. We don't know what we're dealing with in future caps. So we just have to be aware of that, but we also have to be aware of where we are in 2020. And if something makes sense, then we'd consider it. But at this point, again, as always, that stuff stays in-house on an individual matter.
Next up, Ed Bouchette. Ed, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin. Hey, with everything with what your scouts have to go through and teams not playing in college, is that going to present maybe a crapshoot for the 2021 draft?
Yeah, you know what, Ed, everything is so unknown. The schools that aren't playing in the fall, they're hoping to play in the spring. And how does that affect a possible all-star game or a combine situation? Nobody knows, because until we get hard dates, we just have to work under the assumptions that things haven't changed yet. In doing that, we got to cover the schools that are playing, and we also have to evaluate the schools that aren't playing on their film from 2019. If they play in the spring of 2021, then we can add that to our evaluation. So right now, we're just dealing with the known. And the known is that there's 3 Power 5 conferences playing. There's a few outside the Power 5s that are playing, but there's 2 that aren't. So we just have to keep adjusting accordingly. And it could be bigger groups of guys to scout, less, we don't know at this point, quite honestly. And we'll wait for direction from the league as to, further maybe taking away or creating the ability for us to attend more than just games. Will they add an all-star game or even the combine? We just have to wait and see.
Joe Rudder. Joe, go ahead.
You touched on this earlier, Kevin. With those reports that the cap could go down significantly next year, has that already, how much of a challenge is that? And has that hampered you with any you might have wanted to get down already?
No, again, the league has set in place a $175 million floor. So we know that's the lowest it can go. Where it goes from there, nobody knows, because no one can predict their revenues at this point. None of us, especially people in my occupation, are going to try to do that. So we just have to operate with what we know. We have to, again, remind ourselves that this affects 32 teams. It just doesn't affect one team. And again, how will that be reflective of what's doable or undoable in the future? None of us know. This is a great unknown that over time it'll resolve itself, and then we'll act accordingly.
Brooke Pryor. Brooke, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin, I was curious. I haven't seen Ryan Shazier out on the field. I know that he is on that reserved retired list, and it was said that he would have a role within the organization. What has that role been so far, and what do you guys envision him doing going forward?
Yeah, we spoke to Ryan prior to moving into training camp, and Ryan doesn't have an official role with the Steelers as we are right now, and he's very understanding of the current situation that we have to deal with. We only have a certain number of people that are available, or a certain number of spots that are available in the Tier 1, Tier 2 or even the tier 3 groupings. And Ryan understands that he won't be part of those groupings, as we're limited to people within the organization, of course, the media outside in that tier 3. So right now, Ryan will always be a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers in an official or unofficial capacity, but he also understands that we have to deal with current 2020 business, which first and foremost is this training camp, and he knows that even though he's not a part of it or being in the building, he's always going to be a part of us.
Aditi, you're up next. Aditi, go ahead.
Hi, Kevin. Surely you saw what the Detroit Lions did yesterday. I'm wondering the climate that we are in, what's happening, what sort of conversations you've had with your players, your coaches, and your ownership group, really, and what we sort of could expect from the Steelers in regards to, again, the social climate out there right now.
Yeah, anything that occurs in the social justice, social climate world, obviously the Pittsburgh Steelers are aware of. The Pittsburgh Steelers always will talk about those types of issues in-house. You know, Mr. Rooney, Art Rooney, has talked about how we deal with things. Coach Tomlin has dealt with this and made statements about his taking on things like this. And those will always be discussed internally. And then ultimately, you know, Mr. Rooney, Art, would give any directive if he is to. And at this point, you know, that's something that, again, we're always aware of what's going on in the world, and we're always, you know, going to discuss those issues.
Will Graves, you're up next. Go ahead, Will.
Hey, Kev. Just curious, without the revenue from fans being in the stands, are you guys searching for other ways to sort of make up for that this year? And then I guess on top of that, well, you guys have always been hard up against the cap. That's just your philosophy. Obviously, you're trying to win and win now. Would you anticipate that changing, that philosophy changing in terms of the money you could spend if you don't have the monies you would normally have available to you?
Yeah, you know, the revenue creation, that's something that's not under my umbrella, so to speak. Obviously, that's, again, Art's deal. I always tell the marketing folks, hey, look, you know, make us some money so I can spend it. And this year is obviously a huge challenge for everybody. And how are we going to best make ourselves profitable? And nobody knows, because we don't know what rules we're going to be working under as the fall unfolds. So again, that's something that's out of my realm. But I have to understand that there are issues, and we have to react accordingly and be ready as a personnel department to say, okay, under these circumstances, this is what we recommend we do. And again, collectively, Art will give us that direction. And again, we'll act accordingly.
Albie, you're up next. Albie, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin, how you doing?
Doing great.
I know what you were just saying about you don't know how things are going to play out. As of now, what do you think the situation with fans will be? Can you provide any specific details, since we're inside 3 weeks to the start of it?
Really, I can, Albie. Again, that type of information would come from Mr. Art Rooney and Mr. Art Rooney only. He keeps us abreast as to what we're feeling, but again, any kind of announcement that would have to come directly from him.
Noah, you're up next. Noah, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin, going back to the draft, to find guys like Kevin Dotson without or with bare minimum playing and no FCS schools playing, you know, is that even possible? And if so, how do you find those types of guys next year?
Well, you know, Kevin Dotson, you know, we had some all-star game exposure to him. We had a full season of college football to evaluate. He wasn't at a combine. We weren't able to go to his pro day. So we just had to rely on what we thought of him as a football player from the 3 scouts that went in and saw him during the season. So that player was evaluated. I can't say he was evaluated fully because we didn't have that pro day or even a physical on the young man. As we move into this year, the guys that are playing will be able to give us some type of 2020 film, which quite honestly, I will be much more comfortable in evaluating a player that plays in 2020 more so than the guy that doesn't. When you take over, a year plus maybe 2-3 months off the game of football, I don't know what kind of player you're going to be coming out of it. So any way that a young man can play this given season, I think it'll benefit him because we will again have newer, fresher, and a better understanding of what he may be moving into the NFL.
Follow up from Joe Rutter. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, Kevin, for the kids in college that have opted out of this season, do you be able to get a look at them? Would you have to wait to the combine, or could you, test these guys earlier and evaluate them?
Yeah, anybody that wasn't draft eligible moving into the season is still seniors. Rising seniors are draft eligible now with the new rule that the NCAA is pushing through, granting that extra year of eligibility. A lot of those guys may opt in for that extra year, so we have to be aware of them. The only underclassmen that we can look at this point without being officially included into the NFL draft are those players that were designated by their head coaches through an agreement with the AFCA, which allows us to evaluate them as underclassmen. Until a player is deemed draft eligible by the National Football League, we cannot do anything with them other than to evaluate him from afar and just watch how he plays.
Okay, just as a reminder, if you want to raise your hand or anything like that, we will get to you here shortly. Next up is Ed Bouchette. Ed, go ahead again.
Kevin, kind of a follow-up there to my previous question. Is this next year going to test the skill of your scouts and all the scouts, really, the personnel departments around the league more than ever because of what's going on?
Yeah, I think it will, Ed, because it will be different. Just like this past draft was different, this one will be even more different because of some schools playing and some schools not playing. But again, like I reminded the guys this past draft that, listen, guys, we have to do the best we can under the circumstances. There are no excuses. We have to find the best players we can under any circumstances. That's our job. And again, the great Bill Nunn and Art Rooney Jr. and Dick Haley, they did that under the circumstances in 1974. And again, we can all look at that result and understand that that's a great example of what can be done with less information or different types of information than we may have available to us. So we'll take that challenge and we'll do the best we can.
A few more questions here. Brooke Breyer with follow-up. Brooke, go ahead.
Kevin, just curious, how concerned are you about that rash of COVID false positives that happened over the weekend? And do you guys have some contingency plans, or how much does it help to have something like that happen before the regular season starts to figure out what the protocol would be if that were to occur on a game day or a game weekend?
Yeah, fortunately, it happened still while we were all in a training camp mode. Anytime any system goes awry, we try to find out what it was. It's not us, but the league did. They were comfortable with their findings, and we were comfortable in knowing that they will obviously work to avoid these in the future. But what else can we learn? We tried to act within the rules, and we did act within the rules. And now what can the league do to avoid those types of things and make it a better system moving forward? So again, fortunately, it happened in a time where it did cost us a few players in practice, but it didn't cost us any games. And what we learned from this, maybe we'll save those games in the future.
Jerry Dulac with follow-up. Jerry, go ahead.
Hey, Kev, from what you've seen at training camp, with all the limitations surrounding you and every team, no preseason games, will your young guys, particularly your draft choices, are they or will they be able to get enough work to be contributors, or be able to evaluate them to be contributors?
Yeah, when we went into this year, really we compressed a rookie camp, an OTA, a mini camp, a training camp into this period, and had to do it under different rules and circumstances. So we knew it would be challenging for those young players. As coaches said often, we missed over 900 snaps of learning from the spring, and how those players can and will contribute moving into 2020. Only time will tell. It's a bigger challenge for them. A few of these guys are taking that step and doing some really positive things. But again, without a preseason game, how do we know that just because somebody on offense is doing good, that maybe we're just deficient on defense or vice versa? So we're going to learn a lot in that first regular season game against the Giants, because we haven't got to see ourselves against other competition. So sure, it's a bigger hill for those young players to climb. And fortunately, we got a pretty veteran group coming back. And the time they missed, it might be less effective than it might be on the younger group. So again, we'll try to just see where everybody ends up, but we won't know until that first game.
Aditi with a follow-up. Aditi, go ahead.
Kevin, you spent the entire offseason being incredibly bullish on Ben Roethlisberger. And Ben told us a few weeks ago that he doesn't believe any quarterback has ever suffered this injury and had this surgery and come back. And we actually just saw this morning that this legitimately could have been a career-ending injury. Why so bullish? Why were you so sure that he would be 100% committed to coming back, to doing the rehab and looking the way that he's looking right now?
Hey, Aditi, before I address that, I did want to go back on, you reminded me, because it was your question on the social justice issue. As an organization, we will come to an understanding of the current situation. And again, Mr. Rooney, we don't like to say a directive from him, but the suggested behavior of or what the organization or how the organization would address it. But that would be upon recommendations from not only myself, Coach Tomlin, the players, and of course, the Rooneys. So I think that I just wanted to clarify that. Along with the Ben stuff, really, we have said all along, obviously we had some information on how the surgery went. We were confident how the rehab was going. We were encouraged by how Ben was so positive in this whole issue. The thing I kept saying is we might have a better quarterback moving forward, because at his age, without 1 year's work or wear and tear on his legs, on his body, and with maybe a healthier arm coming out of this, that this guy could actually be a better quarterback than he's been. And that's exciting. To this point, it's been great. He's had, physically, he looks great. He's still working on some timing issues because really some of the younger players he hasn't played a lot with. Even a Chase Claypool obviously is a rookie, but Deontay Johnson, Ben spent part of a training camp and, some preseason work in a game and a half. But that's not a lot. So again, Eric Ebron, brand new guy. So he's figuring out that timing, but physically we feel great about where he is.
Two more questions. Follow up from Mike Pursuta. Mike, go ahead.
Kevin, given the COVID climate, would you be more inclined to keep NFL-ready guys or guys who have some experience in the league on the practice squad as opposed to developmental players that might be a couple years away?
Yeah, Mike, a few weeks right before when we got the new rules and understanding that the veteran players, up to 6 veteran players can be part of your practice squad, that changed our thinking because quite honestly, when we look for players that we call futures that we sign in the off season, if they don't have practice squad eligibility, we're a little reluctant to sign those types because they either make your team or they don't. Was this now a possibility? We decided let's look for that young veteran that if he doesn't make your team, he could be eligible for your practice squad. That was part of the reasons we signed the Curtis Rileys and the Smallwoods, because they are that veteran player that is now eligible for a practice squad. Not to say those guys are destined to a practice squad, but at least we have those options. So it is a different world. We've tried to expand our thinking along those ways to make sure that the practice squad that we do come up with is the best practice squad it can be.
Okay, last one from Dale Lawley. Dale, go ahead.
Kevin, you referenced the $175 million floor potential for next year. Is there a potential that that could be negotiated back up again? Because $175 million would be pretty devastating for about half the teams in the league, would it not? I mean, you've got some teams that would be pretty far over that cap next year.
Yeah, well, we know that that's as low as it can go. And, in my mindset, I have to always operate from that point up. If that changes over time, and we don't know what time that is, none of us can predict that at this point. So we have to operate with that understanding, but we also understand that it's something that, as you mentioned, there's a lot of teams in the league that will be affected by it. So again, we're focused on 2020. Let's get the best results that we can now. But when we do that, we're always thinking about 21, 22, 23, and so on and so forth. We're never going to sell this thing out completely to win. We think we have a nice team. We're going to make the best effort we can now, and then we'll keep moving forward and try to be as competitive as we can be in every given season.